The studio lights flared to life like lightning, casting a sharp glow across the polished round table where 4 political commentators were already seated. Their voices buzzed with that smug confidence DC panels were famous for. Everyone interrupting, everyone certain they were the smartest in the room. And at the center of it all sat Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary turned media star, flipping through her notes with that signature half-smile that always meant one thing. She thought she was about to dominate. Then the doors opened. Karoline Leavitt walked in, 27 years old, calm steps, navy suit crisp under the lights, a presence that instantly shifted the room's energy. Even the sound techs paused. Psaki's smile twitched. Karoline took her seat without a word, but the tension wrapped around the table like coiled wire. Everyone knew why she'd been invited. The network wanted fireworks. And with Psaki across from her, someone who had spent years dismissing the MAGA movement with a polished, practiced elegance, the producers were practically rubbing their hands together. The moderator wasted no time. Our topic tonight: misinformation, leadership, and credibility. Jen, Karoline, this one's really for you. Psaki inhaled smoothly, ready to strike first. Well, she said, leaning in with a rehearsed laugh, I just hope this conversation stays factual. I know the new generation of spokespeople struggles with that sometimes. A few panelists chuckled. Karoline didn't. She turned her head slowly, eyes like steel. Jen, she said calmly, if you wanted to talk about who struggles with facts, you really should have prepared better. The room froze. Psaki blinked, just once, but it was enough to show she hadn't expected that level of precision this early. Karoline continued, her voice steady, unflinching. You spent a year avoiding questions about inflation, crime, foreign policy disasters, the border, and every crisis Americans felt. Now you're here pretending to be the referee of truth. That's bold. A ripple went through the audience, half gasp, half applause. Psaki straightened her notes, hiding the irritation tightening her jaw. Karoline, she said sharply, when you've done this job longer than 5 minutes, then you can talk about. But Karoline cut in, voice sharper than before. Oh, I've done it long enough to know that dodging is not leadership, and lecturing the country after leaving the mess behind isn't integrity. The panelists exchanged looks, shock, intrigue, maybe a little fear. Karoline wasn't just here to debate. She was here to take the table, and Psaki realized she wasn't facing a rookie. She was facing a challenger who didn't flinch. The moderator cleared his throat, sensing the eruption building. Okay, this is going to be interesting. He had no idea, because Karoline had only fired the first shot. Jen Psaki shifted in her chair, forcing a polished smile as the studio lights brightened. She wasn't used to losing control of a panel, especially not to someone younger, sharper, and far more dangerous than she expected. Karoline Leavitt had taken only 30 seconds to flip the energy in the room, and now every pair of eyes, hosts, producers, audience, waited for Psaki's counterattack. Psaki leaned into the mic. Well, Karoline, your little monologue was cute, but let's be serious. You're speaking for a man who lies for a living, a man who has... Karoline raised her chin. Careful, Jen. Every time you say the word lie, half the country remembers your podium days. The audience reacted instantly. Gasps, laughs, even a few claps. Psaki blinked, stunned by the hit she didn't see coming. Karoline didn't let the silence settle. You stood at the White House podium telling Americans the border was secure. You told parents the economy was stronger than ever. You spun inflation like it was weather. And now you're calling me dishonest? Psaki's jaw tightened. That's not what I... It's exactly what you said. Karoline snapped back. The host tried stepping in, but Psaki lifted a hand, signaling she could handle it. A mistake she'd regret in under a minute. Psaki straightened her notes. Karoline, you're 27. You've never run a government. You've never handled a national crisis. You're a spokesperson for a businessman-turned-politician whose playbook is chaos." Karoline's smile was small, controlled, lethal. "Jen, you're right. I'm 27, and you're a former press secretary who still can't answer questions without circling, deflecting, and blaming a Republican. We're both doing what we're good at." Psaki opened her mouth, but Karoline kept going. "The difference is, I don't dodge, I don't spin, and I don't hide behind fancy words to excuse failure." There it was, another hit, point blank. Psaki inhaled sharply, her confidence flickering. Karoline leaned in, voice dropping to a razor-edge calm that made the audience lean closer. "You tried to corner me tonight, but you forgot something. I don't scare easily, and I don't back down." The panel table went silent. Even the cameras seemed to freeze on Psaki's expression, caught between frustration and disbelief. Karoline finished the moment with the line that sent the studio buzzing. "If you want to debate truth, leadership, or honesty, I'm right here, and I won't be the one walking out embarrassed." The audience erupted, cheers, whistles, applause crashing like a wave. Jen Psaki looked down at her notes. For the first time, she wondered why she agreed to face Karoline Leavitt at all. For the first time since the panel began, Jen Psaki's confidence visibly wavered. She shifted in her seat, crossing one leg over the other, pretending to stay calm even as the audience murmured, whispers spreading like electricity through the studio. She had expected Karoline Leavitt to crumble under pressure, or at the very least, stumble. But nothing about Karoline's presence hinted at weakness. Psaki leaned forward, her tone sharpened with irritation. "Karoline, you still haven't answered the actual question. You dance around numbers and cherry-picked tweets, but you never explain the core problem. Do you even understand how policy works beyond talking points?" A ripple moved through the crowd. Some laughs, some gasps, some "ooh" reactions. Psaki thought she'd landed a hit. Karoline didn't move, not an inch. She simply lifted her eyes and gave Psaki a look that said, "You really want to do this?" "Jen," Karoline replied smoothly, "policy doesn't work if the people crafting it don't understand the lives of the people living under it." The studio snapped to silence. Karoline continued, voice calm but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. "You live in a world of press briefings, curated questions, rehearsed lines, and carefully selected statistics. I live in the real world, where parents can't afford groceries, where crime is rising, where borders aren't secure, where small businesses barely survive." Psaki straightened up, eyes narrowing. Karoline didn't stop. "You think understanding policy means sitting behind a podium and spinning failures into poetry. Anyone can read notes someone else writes for them. But facing the consequences of those policies, you wouldn't last one day dealing with what American families deal with every single morning." The audience erupted. Applause, cheers, whistles. Even the moderator raised his eyebrows. Psaki forced a smile, but it was tight, strained, more like a grimace. Karoline leaned slightly toward her, voice lower, sharper. "You asked if I understand policy. Let me ask you something, Jen." She paused. The room held its breath. "What good is your expertise if your results make life worse for the people you claim to be helping?" Psaki blinked. Hard. A rare moment of total speechlessness from someone trained to never lose her footing on air. Karoline smiled subtly, perfectly controlled and devastating. "That's not a talking point. That's reality. And it's the one thing your panels never prepare you for." The studio broke into another wave of applause, louder now, sweeping across the room like a tide. Psaki shifted again, tugging at her blazer sleeve, visibly rattled. And for the first time in the entire broadcast, the balance of power had completely, undeniably shifted. Karoline wasn't defending herself anymore. She was leading. The tension at the panel table tightened like a wire ready to snap. Jen Psaki adjusted her stack of printed notes. bright pink highlights marking the lines she clearly planned to use against Karoline, but those lines were already useless. Karoline had walked onto the stage and flipped the room's energy so completely that Psaki's rehearsed jabs now felt outdated, even flimsy. Psaki leaned toward the mic, smiling with that familiar "I've got you cornered" expression she perfected in the Biden White House. "Karoline," she began, "you keep giving these strong opinions, but you're ignoring basic facts. It's easy to attack when you don't understand the complexities of governing." A few polite claps echoed from the far left side of the audience. Nothing strong, nothing confident, just enough to keep Psaki's smile alive. Karoline didn't flinch. She placed her hands on the table, posture straight, eyes locked on Psaki with calm intensity. "Jen, I understand the complexities just fine. What I don't understand is the constant spin. Everything becomes an excuse. Everything becomes a deflection. And the American people are tired of being treated like they can't see what's happening right in front of them." The audience stirred, leaning closer. Psaki forced a light laugh. "Spin? Karoline, I worked in the White House. I know how policy is actually made, not how it looks on social media." Karoline tilted her head slightly, her voice turning sharp enough to cut through the studio lights. "And I work in the real world, Jen. I talk to the people who feel the consequences of those policies. The families paying more for groceries. The parents afraid to send their kids to school. The small businesses crushed by regulations nobody in D.C. even bothers to understand." A wave of applause shot across the room. Psaki blinked, the smile slipping. Karoline didn't stop. "You sit here telling America everything would be fine if we all just trusted the experts a little more. But the experts you defend raised prices, created crises, and blamed everyone except themselves." Psaki tightened her jaw. "And you want to lecture me about understanding reality?" A louder eruption, cheers, whistles, even a couple standing applauses. Psaki tried to jump in. "Karoline," but Karoline kept going, her tone cold and precise. "You tried to corner me with talking points, Jen, but the truth is simple. Your narrative collapses the moment someone in this room asks, 'How are we better off than 4 years ago?'" The panelists fell silent. Psaki's pen tapped nervously against her notepad. Karoline leaned forward just enough for the cameras to catch the shift in power. "You don't have to like my answers, but you can't deny the facts." The crowd roared again. And at that exact moment, Psaki realized she wasn't controlling this panel anymore. Karoline was. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the panel moved into its fact-check segment, the part Psaki always used to corner conservatives. Her confidence returned. Chin high, voice silky, posture sharpened. This was her turf. She gestured toward the massive screen behind them as if she were unveiling a masterpiece. "Let's clear this up," Psaki said, smirking. "Karoline keeps repeating talking points about the border crisis and inflation, but the data says something different." The audience leaned forward. They'd seen this show before. Psaki pulling charts, bending statistics, acting like the final authority in the room. Karoline remained still, because she already knew what was coming, and she already knew she'd tear it apart. Psaki clicked the remote. A graphic appeared. "See?" Psaki said triumphantly. "Inflation was worse during Trump's final months than at any time under Biden. Facts matter, Karoline." Karoline smiled. Barely. "Jen," she said calmly, "you just showed a cherry-picked 4-month window from the middle of a global pandemic." A ripple of laughter spread through the audience. Psaki's smile tightened. Karoline stood, taking a slow step toward the screen. "Here's the full chart," she continued, clicking her own slide, one she had sent to the producers hours earlier. The new graph dwarfed Psaki's, revealing the complete timeline. Inflation soaring gas prices, skyrocketing rent, exploding grocery costs doubling all under Biden. The crowd gasped. Karoline didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Facts matter, Jen, she said. All of them, not just the ones that help your narrative. Psaki opened her mouth to rebut, but Karoline kept going. You spent years at that podium telling Americans things were fine, while the country was breaking under your boss's policies. Families weren't reading your talking points. They were living the consequences. Psaki blinked. Caught. The audience erupted in applause. Karoline delivered the final blow with surgical precision. You don't get to call yourself the guardian of truth while hiding the truth. Not anymore. Not tonight. Psaki lowered her gaze, fingers tightening around her stack of papers. The panel wasn't just shifting. It was collapsing. Around her. Jen Psaki tried to regain control of the stage, but the energy had already shifted, dramatically. The panelists, who moments earlier sat confidently aligned with her, now exchanged uneasy glances as if realizing the terrain beneath them was crumbling. The studio lights seemed brighter, harsher, exposing every micro-reaction. And Karoline? She looked like she had been waiting her whole life for this exact moment. Psaki cleared her throat, lifting her chin. Karoline, she began, you keep throwing accusations, but you haven't explained one thing. Why does your administration repeatedly hide information? Why do you speak in slogans instead of facts? Why? Karoline raised her hand. Just a small, subtle gesture. But it froze Psaki mid-sentence and electrified the room. I don't speak in slogans, Jen, she said calmly. I speak in receipts. A ripple went through the audience. Psaki blinked, caught off guard by the precision. Karoline picked up a folder resting beside her chair and stepped toward the center of the stage. This, she said, lifting a stack of printed transcripts, is every briefing your team refused to release publicly for weeks. This one, she added, pulling another paper, shows you edited out entire sections of questioning about the border, and this, she held up the final sheet, is the internal memo where you advise the administration to limit exposure to scrutiny. Want me to read it aloud? Psaki paled. The panelists shifted like students who realized their teacher was no longer in charge. That's taken out of context, Psaki snapped, her voice rising a notch. Karoline didn't let her breathe. No, Jen, that is the context. She stepped closer, her tone sharpening. You tried to corner me tonight. You tried to set me up. But you forgot one thing. I know your playbook. I studied it while you were still rewriting talking points. The crowd erupted. Cheers, claps, some even standing. Psaki tried to contain the panic flashing across her face. Karoline wasn't done. You accuse my administration of hiding information, but you were the one who told America the border was secure while crossings surged. You were the one who claimed inflation was transitory while families begged for relief. You were the one who stood behind that podium and spun half-truths into polished lines. Psaki tried to jump in. I did my job with integrity. Karoline cut straight through her. Integrity? She asked, tilting her head. Show me one family in America who remembers your integrity when they couldn't afford groceries. Show me one border town sheriff who remembers your integrity when you dismissed their warnings. Show me one reporter you didn't try to intimidate on live TV. The studio fell dead silent. Karoline delivered the final blow with a soft, devastating calm. You didn't want truth. You wanted control. And today, Jen, you picked the wrong person to challenge. The audience exploded. Thunderous applause, shouts, standing ovation. Psaki sat frozen, her rehearsed lines melting into nothing. Karoline didn't look triumphant. She looked steady, unshaken, like someone who knew she had just shifted the entire trajectory of the debate. Because she had. The panel studio felt tighter than before, hotter, louder, charged with the kind of energy that only erupts when someone realizes they're losing control. Jen Psaki could feel it. She straightened her stack of color-coded notes, pretending she wasn't rattled, but even the cameras caught the subtle tremble in her fingers. She wasn't used to this, being the one pushed back, being the one cornered. She was the one who usually did the cornering. Karoline, meanwhile, looked the exact opposite. Steady, shoulders back, the faintest confident smile tugging at her mouth. She had the room now, and everyone knew it. Psaki leaned into her mic. "Okay, Karoline," she said with a thin smile. "You've made your talking points very clear, but you still haven't answered the actual question. How can you defend a communication strategy built on chaos, misinformation, and divisive rhetoric?" She thought she had her. The panel even shifted in her direction, like schoolkids expecting the teacher to win the argument. Karoline didn't blink. She let the silence hang for a full beat, just long enough for the audience to lean in, just long enough for Psaki to start fidgeting. Then Karoline struck. "Misinformation?" she repeated calmly. "Jen, your entire career has been built on redefining that word whenever it helps your side." Psaki stiffened. Karoline continued, voice razor-sharp but controlled. "Every time something inconvenient happened under your administration, it wasn't misinformation. It was a context gap, a timeline misunderstanding, a messaging confusion. You pulled out euphemisms like Band-Aids, hoping no one noticed the wound underneath." The audience murmured. Some laughed, some clapped. Psaki's smile cracked. Karoline leaned in, never raising her voice. "Meanwhile, when our side says something you don't like, suddenly it's dangerous. Suddenly it's extremist. Suddenly it's a threat to democracy." Psaki's eyes widened. She wasn't used to someone saying the quiet part out loud. Karoline kept going, heat building in her voice. "You don't get to lecture America about transparency when your entire communication strategy was built around avoiding questions, circling reporters, and sugarcoating every crisis with friendly language." A cheer erupted from the right side of the studio. Psaki raised a hand, trying to interrupt. "Karoline, that's not..." But Karoline didn't let her. "No, Jen, you asked for an answer. Here it is." She stood straighter, commanding the entire stage. "Your strategy was to hide the mess. Ours is to show it and fix it." The audience roared. Even the camera operators exchanged glances, stunned. Psaki tried one more time. "That's not how communication..." Karoline cut her with a final, devastating line. "You want to talk about chaos? The only chaos on this panel is how fast your narrative is falling apart." The studio exploded. Applause, whistles, shouts, a full wave of energy crashing over the panel. Jen Psaki's face drained of color. The rest of the panel silently stared at Karoline, suddenly unwilling to challenge her. And in that moment, everyone watching knew. Karoline hadn't just won the exchange. She had taken the entire panel from Psaki's hands and crushed the trap she tried to set. For the first time since the panel began, Jen Psaki's smile faltered. It was tiny, barely a twitch at the corner of her lips, but the cameras caught it, magnifying the moment for every viewer across the country. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, trying to regain the calm authority she was known for in the briefing room, but everybody watching could sense it. Karoline had her pinned. Psaki cleared her throat. "Okay," she said with an exaggerated chuckle. "Clearly, we've entered the land of overconfidence. Karoline, you're acting like you're the only person here who understands policy. How about we deal with facts instead of Fox News talking points?" The audience made a soft "ooh," waiting for the next collision. Karoline didn't hesitate. "Facts?" she repeated, leaning forward with the confidence of someone who had already organized her counterattack. "Great. Let's do facts." The room snapped silent. "Fact 1, she said, raising a finger. "You spent years telling Americans the border was secure while releasing statements that contradicted your own data. That's not communication. That's gaslighting." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Psaki blinked twice, fast. Karoline continued, voice razor-sharp. "Fact 2, You stood on national television and claimed inflation was transitory when every economist on the planet said otherwise. Families were getting crushed at the grocery store while you smirked at questions like it was all a joke. Psaki's smile dropped completely. And fact 3, Karoline said, lowering her voice for maximum impact. You've built an entire career dodging accountability, then act offended when someone younger, sharper, and more honest refuses to play along. The audience gasped, then erupted in cheers. Psaki raised her hand, trying to regain control. "Let me respond." Karoline didn't let her. "No, Jen, that's the point. You don't get to lecture America about facts when your entire strategy is deflect, dismiss, and downplay. You think I'm overconfident?" She leaned even closer. "No, I'm just not intimidated by someone who dodged questions for a living." The court's moderator visibly winced. Psaki's cheeks flushed, not with anger but with something far worse for a seasoned communicator: embarrassment. Karoline pressed the advantage. "You tried to corner me tonight," she said, "but you forgot something. You can't corner someone who isn't afraid to answer the question you're too scared to face." The audience exploded. Cheers, whistles, applause that rolled across the stage like thunder. Psaki looked down, jaw tight, fingers gripping her pen. Karoline sat back, unbothered, victorious. And everyone watching knew. This wasn't just a debate. Karoline had dismantled a professional communicator on her own turf. Psaki didn't just lose the argument. She lost the room. For the first time that night, Jen Psaki stopped smiling. Not the polite press room smile she'd perfected at the White House, not the controlled, calculated smirk she used on cable panels. This time her expression faltered. Real, raw, unmistakable. Because Karoline Leavitt wasn't just winning the argument. She was rewriting the entire atmosphere of the stage. Psaki leaned forward, pressing her palms on the desk, trying to pull the conversation back under her control. "Karoline," she said tightly, "you're ignoring context. You're twisting data. You're giving the audience sound bites instead of facts." But the audience didn't buy it, and Karoline knew it. She tilted her head, eyes locked on Psaki with a calm, lethal precision. "Jen, you keep saying I'm twisting facts," she replied, "but somehow you can't point to a single one I twisted." A low wave of applause surged across the room. Psaki blinked. Caught. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, searching for a rebuttal that didn't exist. Karoline didn't wait. "You want to talk about context?" she continued. "Let's talk about the context you never mention." She stepped forward, her voice rising with surgical sharpness. "You were the White House press secretary during some of the worst messaging failures in recent history. Sky-high inflation, a border crisis, chaotic foreign policy. And every time the American people asked for answers, you gave them spin." Psaki attempted to interrupt, but Karoline overrode her effortlessly. "You told families that inflation was transitory. You told the country the border was secure. You insisted everything was under control when everyone could see it wasn't. And now you want to sit here and lecture me on honesty?" The audience erupted. Applause so loud the moderator had to gesture for calm. Psaki stiffened, her jaw tightening. "That's a gross mischaracterization," she snapped. "Inflation was caused by global—" Karoline cut in sharply. "Jen, people couldn't buy groceries. They didn't care which talking point you used." Another blast of applause. Karoline continued, walking the stage like she owned it, because at that moment, she did. "You can blame global factors. You can blame Congress. You can blame Republicans. But the truth is simple. While Americans struggled, you stood at that podium and told them everything was fine." Psaki inhaled sharply, her frustration finally slipping through. "That's not fair." Karoline raised a hand, a move that stopped Psaki cold. "What's not fair," Karoline said quietly, "is gaslighting millions of Americans about problems they're living through every day." Silence fell. tense, electric. Then Karoline delivered the line that would dominate social media for the next 24 hours. You didn't offer truth. You offered comfort to an administration that needed excuses. I offer something else. Accountability. The crowd exploded. Cheers, whistles, people rising to their feet. Psaki froze, staring at Karoline like she'd realized, too late, that she had picked a fight with someone who came prepared. Karoline stepped back to her podium, shoulders squared, voice steady. This isn't the press room anymore, Jen. You can't control the narrative, not tonight. And with that, the room erupted again. Karoline hadn't just shut down the panel. She'd taken ownership of the entire night. The moderator sensed the tension boiling as the panel spiraled into chaos. Jen Psaki's usually composed expression had cracked. Her brows tight, her voice strained, her papers shuffled out of rhythm. The panelists beside her sat stiffly, each of them silently deciding whether to intervene or stay out of the blast radius. But Karoline, she stood like she had been preparing for this exact moment her entire life. Psaki leaned into the mic, her tone sharper than before, desperate to regain control. Karoline, let's be serious. Your talking points are straight out of a campaign script. You're not answering the question. You're dodging accountability for Trump and pushing narratives that— Karoline raised her hand. Calm, controlled. Jen, I'm not dodging anything. I'm correcting you. The studio went absolutely silent. Even the camera operators froze. She stepped closer to the panel table, placing her notes down with calculated precision, as if signaling the final round of a fight she was already winning. You want accountability, she said. Let's talk about accountability. Her eyes locked on Psaki, unblinking, direct, impossible to ignore. You stood at the White House podium for months insisting inflation was transitory. It wasn't. You told families the border was secure. It wasn't. You said Americans stranded in Afghanistan were not left behind. They were. You didn't inform the public. You managed perception. And now you want to lecture me about honesty. The crowd gasped. Psaki inhaled sharply, her cheeks flushing. Karoline wasn't done. You accuse me of pushing narratives, but you built your entire career on talking points. You weren't a press secretary. You were a shield, one that cracked the moment real questions hit. A thunder of applause surged across the room, so loud the moderator leaned back, unsure whether to intervene or just let it play out. Psaki tried to speak, but the words stumbled. Well, that's not an accurate— Karoline cut cleanly through it. Jen, every time you get cornered, you retreat to vague language and rehearsed lines. You say context matters when the story hurts your side. You say misinformation when you're losing the argument. You say we're still reviewing the data when reality contradicts you. The audience roared again, this time with laughter mixed into the applause. Karoline leaned in just slightly, lowering her voice so the moment carried real gravity. You didn't come here to debate. You came here to dominate the narrative. But tonight, it didn't work. Not because I'm louder, not because I'm younger, not because I'm conservative. She paused. But because the truth doesn't need rehearsing. Psaki blinked, visibly shaking. Not dramatically, but enough for millions watching at home to catch it. The panelists exchanged wide-eyed glances, and even the moderator's posture softened in admiration for Karoline's command. Karoline lifted her chin and delivered the final blow, the line that would go viral within minutes. You tried to corner me, Jen, but the only thing you cornered was yourself. The studio exploded. People jumped to their feet. A roar of cheers, whistles, claps, the loudest reaction of the night, shook the stage. Psaki sank back in her chair, staring ahead, stunned into silence. Karoline simply smiled, gathered her notes, and stepped back from the podium like a fighter walking out of the ring after a clean knockout. The panel was finished. The debate was finished. And Jen Psaki, once the unshakable voice of the Biden administration had just been dismantled by a 27-year-old who refused to blink. Karoline didn't just win the night, she owned it, and everyone in the room knew it.